Hello, Infobip Shift. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here on this stage again. I was one of the speakers last year on this stage, and you could, I do just about anything to speak on this stage again because it's so fun to walk around. I was the one who did the wave last year. That's where they got the idea. It was my idea. Actually, it wasn't my idea. Somebody else told me to do it, and I did, and it was super fun. So because we already did the wave, we're actually going to do something else. I'd like everybody to please stand up. If you're physically able and want to join us, please do. I'm going to wait until you do. So we're just going to sit here in awkwardness. I want you to put your arms out in front of you like this and squat down and come back up. Yeah, we're doing exercise here. This is called an air squat. We're going to do 12 of these together, and you need to count out loud with me. Otherwise, it'll be kind of awkward. All right, ready? 1, 2, you're not counting. 2, 3, 4, 5, you're way too quiet. 6, 7, thank you. 8, 9, 10, let's do actually 13, 11, that's because you're not counting loud enough. 12, and one more. 13, awesome. Stretch up over your head as high as you can, and even higher than that. And then over one side, and over to the other. Awesome. You're all ready for lunch and everything. You can sit down. This is actually really important. You should be doing this throughout the day, throughout your workday, moving your body because it gets blood flowing through your body, oxygen to the brain. It's really important. So thank you for indulging me. This talk is an explanation of what progressive enhancement is, a demonstration of what it can do for us and for your users. So it's both about developer experience as well as user experience. And there's going to be a mic drop moment, but I'm wearing it on my face, so you'll see what that looks like. Face on the ground. No, just kidding. So this, we're not going to be talking about how much we hate JavaScript or anything. Progressive enhancement is actually all about JavaScript. So let's get started. First, I want to ask you a question. I really want you to be thinking about this as we're talking. How many of you, raise your hand if you've been doing this web thing for over a decade? Okay, we've got a couple of you. Do any of you lament how hard it is to build for the web these days? If you're building anything of sufficient complexity and you've brought in your Webpack and your React and whatever else, there's something that made it a lot harder than it used to be. We're going to talk a little bit about that. How can we make it as easy as it used to be? So progressive enhancement, this is what I thought progressive enhancement was when I first heard about it. I just thought you get, if the browser has certain features like geolocation, then we can make the user's experience better by utilizing those features. So if you're Domino's and a user comes to your site and says, hey, I want a pizza, you can check, hey, do they have geolocation enabled? Let's request that permission. And now we can tell them the exact Domino's that they're going to be ordering their pizza from, rather than forcing them to type in their zip code or whatever. So progressive enhancement's actually been around for way longer than the geolocation API on the web. It was introduced back in 2003, and the basic premise is a couple of things. So content should be, and functionality should be accessible to all web browsers. Markup contains all the content. The layout comes from CSS. Behavior comes from JavaScript, and browser preferences should be respected. So those are the ideas. Now, in the modern way that most people are building web applications, they do not do this. For a lot of the web applications we build, the markup doesn't contain all the content. That is all in JavaScript because we're rendering JSX and we're loading our internationalization strings and stuff. And we're not server rendering that and whatever. And to be a little bit more specific, I want to talk about how enhancing the experience is just way better than enabling the experience with JavaScript. JavaScript should not be there to make it possible for people to use your apps, at least in the client. It should be there to make the experience of using your apps better. So this is an example. I'm going to slow down the network to a throttled 3G connection, and we're going to go to youtube.com. This is something I experienced as a user of YouTube once. I wanted to go to YouTube and do a search. So the first thing that's going to happen is it sends me an HTML document with just a bunch of pre-filled stuff, and it's downloading JavaScript. So the placeholders here are just like sitting there, and I, as a user, am just waiting for the rest of the app to load. We're very used to this in our world. That's kind of how things work. But we're waiting for this desktop Polymer JavaScript file to download, and it's 1.3 megabytes, which, wow, that's a lot of JavaScript. So once that finally downloads, then I can actually do my search. The search input shows up, but you'll notice that I'm typing, I'm hitting enter, and it clears my search. So that's still not working. I actually now have to wait for another JavaScript file called base.js to download. That's another 0.5 megabyte before that search functionality will actually work. This is actually really frustrating to me because I happen to know that I don't need JavaScript to do what I'm trying to do. All I want to do is have an input. I type in my search, I hit enter, and when it finally does work, it's going to take me to the results page with my query as part of the query string. The browser does this. It knows how to do this. So when YouTube decides, hey, let's bring JavaScript along, they are removing the capabilities that the browser already has. They could have had their index HTML that they serve from a CDN have an input element. I don't understand why they didn't do that, because the browser can handle this. And that's what progressive enhancement is about. It's about making it so that users can start using your app before the JavaScript is finished loading. The JavaScript should not enable the experience, it should enhance it, should make it better. So when we're talking about this, a lot of people are like, well, yeah, I mean, that works for an input, but what about something like Figma? And I promise I included Figma before it became a big thing in the news recently. Apparently, everybody hates Adobe, and everybody's mad about this acquisition. But forget that for a second. How could you build something like Figma without JavaScript? Because you got like really complex stuff. It's a canvas after all. Well, you can actually build it without JavaScript and progressively enhance it with JavaScript. So this is Jenna. Jen's on Twitter. And she just, for the fun of it, decided she wanted to try and build Figma without client-side JavaScript. And it totally works. It's totally a joke also. She's not actually going to, well, I don't know. Maybe due to the acquisition, maybe she will build it. But Jenna is the one who got me kind of thinking about what we can do without client-side JavaScript. We can actually do some pretty impressive things and then just make the experience better with JavaScript. We like client-side JavaScript. We just can give our users a much better user experience if we think about progressive enhancement. But it's not just about user experience. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. So she built this with Remix. As was mentioned, I actually used to be the director of developer experience at Remix. I've actually gone off on my own now, and I'm working on Epic Web Dev. So if you actually, how many of you have used Epic React? Anybody here use? Okay, got some folks. Thank you. So if you want to learn React, Epic React is a course that I've created that is unlike anything else you've ever seen. If you're thinking, oh, it's like a Udemy course, no, it's nothing like a Udemy course. It's more like a semester class at a university. So I'm building Epic Web now, and that is going to be like a 2-year university degree, the size of that thing. So it's going to be huge, and it's going to feature Remix. But I'm no longer the director of developer experience at Remix. So let's talk about how Remix enables us to build progressive enhanced experiences and makes our code way simpler. And I want you to remember that question that I asked at the beginning. Did you forget it? It's why was web dev so much easier in the past? So how many of you have seen To Do MVC before? Okay, some of you OG. So like I got into the web dev world a little bit before To Do MVC became a popular thing. So To Do MVC was just an app that was a simple to-do app that allowed people to compare different UI frameworks like Backbone, Angular, React, Vue, all of these. So Ember. So To Do MVC came around at the time where we kind of decided, you know what, this whole multi-page app with some JavaScript sprinkles to improve the user experience, that's no good. Let's just throw that away. We'll do everything in the client, all JavaScript. And that is like the antithesis of progressive enhancement, right? Like we are enabling the experience now with JavaScript. And that's around the time that I entered the web development world. So I rebuilt the To-Do MVC app with Remix, and there are a couple of differences in my implementation. So you can actually go to this right now if you want to. It's remix-todomvc.fly.dev. And there are a couple of different things here. So it was built with Remix. It actually supports backend persistence, whereas the other implementations just use local storage. Adding that is like an enormous amount of complexity, because now you have to think about errors due to the network. You have to think about the network and pending states and everything. Whereas with local storage, it's like, write it to local storage. So there's backend persistence, user authentication. So you could actually use this on multiple devices if you wanted to. If you want to use this as your to-do app, be my guest. And it's progressively enhanced, and it actually ships 15% less client-side JavaScript than the comparable other React implementation of this, which is interesting because it has like far more features, and it's still less code. Less code means, most of the time, means better developer experience, and I'll demonstrate that here in a bit. The other thing that is interesting about this is it's also a way better user experience. So this test was done on a slow device in India, and my implementation with Remix is 2.5 times faster, or around just over 2 times faster than the comparable implementation that was all client-side. So better user experience and less code, better DX. We'll look at that more specifically here in a sec. So first, I want to talk about the progressive enhancement piece. So I just disabled JavaScript. We refresh, you'll see all the red on the scripts, so those JavaScript files have not loaded. And now you'll see as I'm interacting with the app, everything is still working. It's working as expected. And you'll notice the favicon is spinning every time I do one of these interactions. That's because we're getting a full page refresh. This is a multi-page app. That's basically the way we, and maybe some of you are still building web apps this way, but that's the way that we used to build web apps over a decade ago. And it still totally works. This is what it means to be progressively enhanced. So the baseline is app is functional, app works. And then you add JavaScript to make the experience better. So the way that this works, because with Remix, I'm writing it like it's a client-side app. So the way that this works is Remix actually understands the request that the browser will do if you don't have JavaScript to stop it. So for a lot of us, people who entered the web dev world a little bit after I did, started with, here's how you do a mutation. You have a form, you have an onSubmit handler, and the first thing you do in there is event.prevent default. And without any understanding of what default you're actually preventing. So this is the default that you're preventing. The browser actually knows how to serialize the inputs of a form. So we have our form here. We have our method post, and so that says instead of serializing in the URL query string, we're going to serialize it as part of the post body. And then for each one of the inputs that are part of that form, that's going to be submitted along with the request. Now, this is a toggle button to check a to-do off or not. And I don't want the user to have to type in the to-do ID before they submit that form, right? So I have hidden inputs. For some of you who've been around here for over a decade, you're probably like, yeah, of course, that's how we always did it. But for those of you who are a little newer, you're like, wait, hidden inputs, what is that? So that's what that's for, is so that I can declaratively associate some piece of data with a form submission. So we've got that for our to-do ID, also one for what we want the new state to be when the user submits this form. And then finally, we actually, fun fact, on the submit button, you can actually give that a name and a value. And you could actually have multiple submit buttons for a single form. And whichever button the user clicks on, that's what is going to be sent along with the serialized form. That's all browser behavior. No JavaScript going on in here in the client, all just the way that the browser works, which I think is pretty rad. So my question, why was web dev so much easier before we started adding all of this client-side JavaScript? To answer that question, I want to ask you another question. We're going to look at this recording again. This is the same one as before. I want you to guess what client-side JavaScript library I'm using to manage state in this application. Is it Redux? Is it MobX? React Query? Apollo? What am I using to manage application state in this application? Nothing. That's right. I'm not using anything because there is no JavaScript on this page. So I can't. I don't have an option because I've disabled JavaScript. So that is, I'm showing you proof. Of course, your users aren't going to disable JavaScript. There are some who do that, by the way, which is kind of odd, but most users don't do that. So that's not the important part. You're not like, oh, well, I'm going to make it work without JavaScript for those like 6 users who don't use JavaScript. No, that's not what we're doing this for. I'm showing you this to prove that you don't have to use an application state management library when you're using Remix and progressive enhancement in particular. That is huge. It's the mental model. That's the answer to the question. Why was it so much easier to build for the web years ago? It's because the mental model was so much simpler. It was way better than the SPA mental model. With the MPA, you didn't think about state management, even on the server. You just shove things in the database, and then the next user that comes around to get some HTML, they generate it new from the database. So there's no sort of like synchronizing of anything. Of course, you probably did have caches, and that added complexity, but you're going to have that anyway, right? With your backends, you're always going to have to deal with caches and stuff. But we just added a bunch of complexity for our single-page apps for the client side. So the mental model of a multi-page app is way, way simpler than the SPA, and that is the difference. It's client-side state management. However, there's a reason we brought in all this JavaScript. We didn't just do this for fun because we like JavaScript. We did this because the capabilities of a SPA, the user experience, is just so much better, or it can be, than a multi-page app. Now, maybe if you've got like this nonsense layout shift with like 30 different spinners and everything, I wouldn't say that's a better user experience. But once the user's there, once they've got the app, a SPA experience is so much better. You're navigating between these pages. You could do transitions and animations for error messages. Autofocus is way better. So wouldn't it be nice if we could just take the nice the nice mental model of multi-page apps and sync it up with the nice capabilities of a single-page app? And that is what progressive enhancement gets you. That's what Remix enables. It gives you the amazing developer experience and user experience of an MPA with the great user experience of a SPA. And I want to show you some specific examples. But before this, there's no application state management with Remix. There's like components. We're using React in Remix right now. There are components that you can build with Remix, of course. Complex things like autocomplete or whatever. You're going to use state in those. That is different thing from what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the really complex thing. The thing that's like, if you're building a single page app today, 30 to 50% of your code and bugs live in state management. That's just the way that it is. So imagine if you could delete all of that stuff. That sounds pretty great. Almost, even if you're building something as complex as Figma, that's almost a mic drop moment. So let's look at something specific. If I wanted to add pending UI, the browser does this automatically. So I still have JavaScript disabled. I delete an item, whatever. It has a spinner in the favicon. This is the way that the browser has behaved forever. When you make a mutation, it's going to do a spinner. But if I'm building Twitter and I have a favorite button, I don't want a spinner in the favicon every time I like a tweet and a full page refresh. What garbage is that? Nobody wants that. And so we're going to start using fetch to actually make or XHR if you're OG, and make a request without having the whole browser reload and everything. So if we bring in JavaScript on this page, and I do some sort of mutation, I actually, and this is going to be via fetch now, I get no indication as a user that something has happened. That's the default behavior here. So if we start doing fetches, there's nothing in the browser that's built in that says, when you do a fetch request, let's have this spinner in the favicon, which is right. That's correct behavior. That would be super annoying if every fetch request that was made by your client-side JavaScript resulted in a spinner. So let's look at what it's like to implement that with Remix, which is simply emulating the behavior of the browser here. Even better than a favicon spinner is something that's more local to where the user is making the mutation. And so this is a list item component that is rendering each one of those list items. And we have these things in Remix called fetchers. which I just think is a brilliant name. And so we have one for each one of the mutations that we can do on these list items. And the one we're going to be targeting is the toggle fetcher there. And what I need to know to be able to show a pending state is when this toggle fetcher is active, like when there's a submission happening, the user has submitted this form. So I'm going to just say, hey, if the toggle fetcher submission is truthy, make a Boolean out of that. I know a lot of you would do a double bang, which that's fine with me, but I'm going to do the Boolean. Nobody does this. I've never seen anybody do it. You do it. Thank you. I just think this is so much more clear than a double bang. But so if there is a submission, then we know that we're in a toggling state, and I can show the pending state. And that's it. I'm done. Now I just render this wherever I need to show the pending state. So my designer said, just disable everything, and I've got some CSS that will make it look like it's in a pending state. So sweet. I'll go disable the button for toggling. I'll disable the input for editing, and I'll disable the delete button for deleting. And that is what the designer said for me to do. So now when I click that off, it will say, hey, like something's going on over here. You can't do anything else. You're just going to wait. And this is a way better user experience than having the favicon spinner, because I get something like really specific to where the action took place. I'm giving the user much better feedback. It's actually really common that the user might not even notice that the favicon is spinning. So having some local visual of where that pending state is taking place, that is definitely a better user experience. And what's really cool about that is I was able to progressively enhance. So I changed nothing but what you saw. No joke. I just like one line and then disabled a couple of things. And I get the progressively enhanced experience, the thing that works with the regular browser behavior, but then I've enhanced it with a little bit of JavaScript. That's what progressive enhancement is, and it makes that user experience better. And you notice I didn't have any dispatch to Redux or any sort of like set states or any of that. This is all completely free of useState, useReducer, useEffect, all of that nonsense. I don't have to do any of that. And so to me, if some of you are like, yeah, but that's React and I hate React and React is garbage, that is fine. You are definitely in the minority. Or maybe you're using React and you still feel that way. I don't know if I can say that's the minority, but that's totally cool. For me, Remix has turned React into a template library. And then, of course, we've got like those more complex components that our component team is working on for those really awesome experiences like date pickers and stuff. But as an app developer, I don't have to deal with this nonsense. That sounds great. Sign me up. I'm in. Let's talk about optimistic UI. This is something that most of us probably should be implementing in some areas of our app. We shouldn't do it everywhere, but absolutely every app has a couple of situations where they should be doing optimistic UI. So I created a tweet. And you notice I'm on a slow 3G connection. When I favorite the tweet, it instantly favorites. Instant red heart. How is that possible if it takes actually some time to make that network request? Well, what's happening, and I'm going to back this up to start it over. What's happening is Twitter says, hey, 99.999% of the time, this is going to work. So we're going to make it look like it worked, and we'll just have the network do its thing in the background. This is called optimistic UI. It's a pretty common pattern, not as common as it should be. But what happens when your optimism is misplaced? So if I delete this tweet, and then I go to unfavorite it, then it's going to instantly show it's not favorited, and then the network's going to do its thing, and it's going to come back and say, actually, that tweet was deleted. So we have to favorite it again to restore the UI to the actual state of the actual world. That is actually what makes optimistic UI so challenging, is that oh, what happens if things don't work? What if there's an error? What if the user got disconnected from the internet? What if the tweet was deleted? What if any number of things? What if they're in like 2 browser tabs and they hit it in both? All sorts of things can happen. So it's the rollback is what makes optimistic UI such a challenge. So let's see what it looks like. And I should mention, I've implemented optimistic UI in Backbone, AngularJS, React with Redux, React Query, and now Remix. And I have a favorite. So here's our list item again. And we have one bit of information that I think is important for you to know, and that is we know what the next state is going to be. So when this form is submitted, this is the state that to-do should be in. It's the opposite of what it's currently in, right? So for that complete state, we're currently deriving it from the to-do, what the current data is, which makes sense. We're showing what the current state is. If we want to optimistically show what the next state will be after the user has submitted this, all we have to do is say, hey, toggle fetcher, if you've got a submission, then I want to get that form data object that you've created for that submission. I'm going to get the complete state out of that. If that is true, then that's what I'm going to use for the complete state that I use to render my component. I'm done. I am completely done implementing optimistic UI for this particular user experience. I don't know how many of you have implemented optimistic UI, but it is never that easy, ever, especially when we talk about rollback. So this is what it looks like. I check it off, and it's instantly, it appears like I am on a lightning fast connection. The database is running on my machine. And Remix just takes care of making sure that everything is correct when it's all done. You'll also notice there are some red requests in there. Those requests are canceled because Remix is automatically revalidating the data after a successful post. But when you make another mutation, it's like, well, the data that's coming back from that request is going to be old anyway, so we'll just cancel that. Remix manages those race conditions, those form resubmissions, all of that stuff for you because it's emulating the browser. It's just doing what the browser would have done if we didn't have JavaScript on the page. Because if you do the same thing without JavaScript in the client, that's what the browser would do. And by the end of it, it's all correct. So you don't have to think about it, including what happens if there is an error. How do we roll back? So with rollback, you check it off, and there's the error, and Remix automatically makes sure that your component is back in the right state. Fewer bugs and fewer code, better user experience, way faster development, and it's way more fun. So I went ahead and implemented optimistic UI for the whole app. This whole thing is oh, and by the way, I also made the backend respond with an error if you give a to-do called error, so you can test that out. But this whole thing is 600 lines of code. It's less code both written and delivered to the client than the comparable to-do MVC that's React TypeScript to-do MVC. And it has way more features. So less code, less bugs. It's amazing. You're way, way more productive using Remix. And in large part, that's because of progressive enhancement. So to wrap things up, progressive enhancement's about accessibility. You want to make user or your application as accessible as possible, not just from like assistive technology standpoint, which of course you want that also, but from a like my network connection is really slow. I'm at this conference and I'm in a different country and my data plan doesn't work as well over here or whatever. Even for those apps, those of you who are like, yeah, but my app is behind a login screen, that executive that's using your app and paying millions of dollars for your app is in China and on a bad network connection. They don't want to look at a white screen while they're waiting for your JavaScript to download and render the components. So that's what progressive enhancement is about, improving that user experience. Remix enables progressive enhancement through just the way that it's been designed. And it simplifies developer experience because of that, because of the MPA aspect, and improves UX because of the SPA aspect. Remix, I can't really call it a MPA or a SPA-based framework. It's both. So we call it Sender Stack. Working without JavaScript is just as much about DX as it is about UX. You all are spectacular. Thank you so much.